Well, thank you very much for joining us, Ai-jen Poo, who is one of the great organizers of workers, of people, domestic workers, carers, and so on in the US. And we wanted to have a quick chat about the relevance of some of those ideas and experiences to IID and the design of the next generation of public institutions, hopefully with a better balance between power and work and care and so on. And I thought we might start by asking you just a bit on sort of where we are in the longer sweep of history. So most states, most public institutions for the last few thousand years have been very hierarchical, sometimes very oppressive, sometimes very exploitative. And then in the last couple of hundred years, we've seen counter movements, social movements, trade unions, mutuals, co-ops, trying to embody a very different way of organizing. Where are we now in that history? Is it moving forward or backwards?
Well, I do believe that in times of uncertainty and crisis, people find each other and build community and come together in new ways. And I know for my organization, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, some of our times of greatest growth and renewal have been in times of crisis, like in COVID, for example, where people really saw their resilience as in relationship with other people who are facing similar challenges. And so I do think that this time is a time of building a community, of building trust, of building institutions, rebuilding and renewing institutions for, by, and of the people. And so that may be a hopeful take as we watch many institutions sort of defunded and under threat. But this is also a time for us to assess what we can build together for the future that will be durable and will be responsive to people's needs.
And how are you going about organizing? What are the new tools for organizing, particularly people who may be very isolated, very separated from each other? How do you balance the local and you're organizing on a very large scale at the same time?
Any and all tactics is how. So we have 74 local affiliates and chapters that are based in local communities, and in many ways are institutions that communities know and have come to trust as places to go for information, for resources, for assistance. We also have built out our digital reach and communicate with hundreds of thousands of caregivers and domestic workers through chatbots, through online, through SMS and WhatsApp. So we have lots of ways that we are reaching and communicating and trying to leverage the power of technology, which has been able to aggregate very isolated groups of people in new ways. So I see technology, when it's deployed well towards the right values and goals, as potentially very assistive in this time of building and connecting.
So one of the fundamental questions we're trying to look at in IID, in a sense, is what kind of state, what kind of public institutions are best suited for civil society and communities to interact with in a constructive way. And we're looking at things like the care blocks in Colombia, which are supporting carers, but also policies on time, the organization of time in Barcelona, Buenos Aires, and elsewhere. What would your ideal kind of state look like that was easier for domestic workers, care workers to interact with?
Well, the word accountability comes to mind quite a bit. I think about the everyday domestic worker in the United States. Majority of domestic workers are mothers. They work unpredictable, often long hours. They have no access to a safety net. 80% of domestic workers don't have a single paid sick day, no access to health insurance. And from her perspective, who is accountable to her and her needs and her dreams, her aspirations for her family? And movements and civil society have often stepped in to play that role. But civil society simply cannot play the role of delivering services at scale that women like domestic workers and their families need. So how do we reimagine our institutions to be responsive to their needs, to their dreams, and also accountable as things evolve, as technology changes how we operate, how we get information, where our attention goes? How do we make sure that the needs of the people who are most isolated with the least amount of access to resources and power feel represented?
Yeah, and at the moment, some of the trends are definitely going in the opposite direction. I think in the early months of the pandemic, the US federal government ranked every job by how essential it was at the time. And 48% of the lowest paid workers under $15 an hour were deemed essential. So that's carers, nurses, delivery workers, retail. And they couldn't work out what percentage of the highest paid were essential. It seemed to be rather low. The hedge fund managers were not essential in a crisis. So our kind of labor market has become very weird, where we pay the least to the most essential and sometimes the most to the least essential. What would new institutions for fairness in the labor market look like?
Listen, I think that one of the most important revelations of COVID was that long before there was a pandemic, we had an epidemic of low-wage work in America, where millions upon millions of people who we were suddenly seeing as essential work incredibly hard and still cannot make ends meet. And our institutions for the future need to establish a baseline where people who are doing everything right can afford to live safely and take care of the people that they love and contribute in a profession and a job that has dignity. And institutions should be enabling that kind of opportunity and freedom. And I think about in the US how little we have in terms of a care infrastructure. There's no program for everyday middle and working class families to assist them to afford childcare, to afford long-term care for older adults or people with disabilities. So people are really left on their own. And I think institutions of the future would see that as a problem for society to take on head on, to enable a foundation that is more secure, that enables everybody to start from a place of basic care, safety, and opportunity.
Absolutely. And that's partly about pay levels. And there are institutions in countries like South Africa which set pay for care workers. Partly it's about respect and training, and partly about respite, which is what the care blocks example
That's right.
Provides. In a way, this is obviously going to be one of the great issues for the world in the next few decades, as demographic shifts move very fast in countries like China and Korea. They already have in Japan and Italy and other countries an ever greater need for care. And yet our societies haven't really had proper debates about preparing for that, about what
Right.
it will imply. And there's maybe even a bit of myopia. People don't want to think about themselves in need of care in 20 or 40 or 50 years' time. What can we do you think, to catalyze just a more realistic debate about the future of care, which then might make it easier to solve some of the problems you mentioned?
Well, culturally, we fear conversations about aging and disability and these fundamental mental models we have about our own independence and agency are all wrapped up in this conversation. And I think to reframe that a safety net and a social contract that we have with our societies and our governments needs to be reimagined for this time. That the needs that we once could assume someone in the household could perform, it no longer exists. We just have to be much more practical about the situation, and remember that aging is living and caregiving is fundamental to being human. And if we design a future that acknowledges those things, that we actually could be freed to contribute and to live well for longer. And I think framing it as an opportunity allows us to not only embrace the challenge of care to come, but will assist us in embracing and facing all the other existential challenges we face in the future.
Yeah, we begin and probably end our lives in the hands of others, being cared for. Our mobile phones aren't so crucial at those moments.
And I haven't yet seen a robot that can care for our loved ones yet.
Yeah.
So,
final question. I mean, what might be a message from you to the hundreds of innovators coming to IID, the people all over the world trying to create public institutions which better reflect the best of our values, the best of our societies?
Well, I recently took a group of home care workers to Silicon Valley to learn about AI models that are being developed, to discuss the implications for care and care work in the future and what it could look like to build technologies that actually enhance the quality of care that we receive and the quality of work for the people who are performing these services. And the interaction between innovators and workers who are on the front lines every day of the reality of care was so dynamic. And I just want to encourage the innovators to be proximate to the people who are least visible in our societies and to live a day in their shoes in order to think about how we might reimagine and redesign our systems and our governments to better serve. Because when we design for those least visible and most vulnerable, it is the most universal design.
And AI personal assistants, co-pilots, agents, and so on could be incredibly useful in care. But because the tech people don't really think about this, they're much more often thinking about the needs of a middle-aged executive. And it's really sad because it is a technology with enormous untapped potential.
Yes, well, that's up to us, right? How we line up the incentives to build the kind of tools to solve for opportunity and equality and real trust and accountability and responsiveness to people. That is all up to us.